It's one of the biggest fails in business history. New Coke. You probably know the story. Classic brand replaces its classic product, and customers say, no thank you. Well, that's underplaying it a little bit. It was more like the entire world took one sip, spit it out, and said, New Coke. But contrary to popular belief, New Coke was a great idea and a great product, even if it was a huge marketing disaster. It's all down to some common psychology traps that Coke fell into, and you could too. In the 1980s, Coca-Cola was at war. They were duking it out with their biggest rival, Pepsi, who at the time were winning, not by a little. After World War II, Coca-Cola owned 60% of the cola market, but by 1983 it had less than 24%, all because of competitive pressure from Pepsi. There's a reason that the rivalry between Coke and Pepsi was called the Cola Wars. In particular, Pepsi's tactics were vicious. They launched a nationwide taste test called the Pepsi Challenge, where people were blindfolded, served both Coke and Pepsi, and people overwhelmingly chose Pepsi. So Coke did something that any brand that was losing market share and under lots of competitive pressure would do. They created a new product. They launched a secret plan, codenamed Project Kansas, to create a sweeter version of the classic Coca-Cola flavor that could compete with Pepsi's taste appeal. But they didn't introduce it as a new drink. Instead, they replaced their most important product, Coca-Cola, with a newer, sweeter version called New Coke, all because they fell into a common psychological trap called action bias. It's a cognitive bias or an error in thinking that basically says that when we're stuck, our brains prefer to do something, anything, rather than just sit back and see how things unfold. Because the Pepsi Challenge was putting direct pressure on Coke's flagship product, the brand felt like it had to take action to change that product. Coke fell victim to action bias and took a legendary wrong turn. By 1984, Coke's Project Kansas had their prototype for sweeter Coke, but they didn't just throw it on the shelves. They did what any big, responsible company would do. They tested it with customers.
It's the best Coke I've ever had. It's just delicious.
But that would turn out to be the biggest mistake of all. Coca-Cola spent what would be about $12 million today to get 200,000 people to try New Coke, and New Coke overwhelmingly beat both Pepsi and Coke Classic. The results of the sampling surveys were so positive that one of Coke's bottling partners actually threatened to sue them if they did not release New Coke. It seemed like a no-brainer to release a product hundreds of thousands of people preferred, but there was a big flaw in the way the surveys and focus groups were performed. They only gave out a small amount of New Coke. These little samples didn't reflect how people drank Coke in real life. And critically, these focus groups didn't account for the psychological impact that changing Coke Classic would have on people. Coke's executives ignored something called loss aversion, a psychological principle that says people hate to lose. In fact, losing something is twice as painful as the happiness of gaining the same exact thing. Coca-Cola was a part of people's lives. The brand and the product stood for more than just quenching people's thirst. And when New Coke suddenly replaced old Coke, it angered millions of people who felt like something they loved had been taken away. The story of New Coke is really the story of one man, Coke CEO Roberto Goizueta. Born in Cuba before the rise of Fidel Castro, Goizueta's family had made their money in sugar and real estate. Eventually, they were forced to flee to the US, where Roberto began working as a chemical engineer for Coke, first in Miami, then in the Bahamas. By the time Goizueta became the president of Coca-Cola in 1979, the brand was in serious trouble. He did successfully lead Coke through one of its most turbulent times. Goizueta launched Diet Coke and Cherry Coke. He championed classic ad campaigns like Always Coca-Cola. So how could such a smart guy make such a serious mistake? Well, early in his career, Goizueta was in charge of Coke in the Bahamas, and he had improved sales by tweaking the flavor of Coca-Cola in that market. Because of that past success, he mistakenly believed that he could do the same thing in Coke's core market, the US. Goizueta's mind was already made up before New Coke went into testing. In his words, it was New Coke or no Coke. So Goizueta became the victim of confirmation bias. He believed that New Coke had to work, so he ignored information that might have contradicted that belief and ignored the psychological impact that killing old Coke would have on customers. Goizueta had sold himself on the idea of New Coke. He'd spent millions in research and development, and he wasn't going to let anything stand in his way. When Pepsi found out that New Coke was going to be launched, their PR machine went into overdrive. During the press conference to launch New Coke, on what would later become known as Black Tuesday, reporters were asking really tough questions like this one.
I mean, are you 100% certain that this won't bomb, this new formula?
That's because in the days leading up to the press conference, Pepsi had called and prepped more than 200 reporters with tough questions and lines of attack. Pepsi even created tons of marketing that declared they had won the Cola Wars. And after years of the Cola Wars raging, the media wanted a hook. So the media grabbed onto the narrative that Coke had taken a massive misstep. They played up the failure and began spinning the facts to rile up Coke's most loyal fans. Whether it was true or not, it was a great story, and the media jumped on every quote from every angry customer they could find. That turned into demonstrations and letter-writing campaigns. In just a few months, there were more than 8,000 angry calls to Coke's Atlanta headquarters every single day. It wasn't the taste of New Coke that failed. It was the idea of New Coke that failed. In fact, lots of people preferred the taste of New Coke. Roberto Goizueta himself drank New Coke every day for the rest of his life, and Coke hasn't shied away from its mistake. Its own website calls New Coke one of the most memorable marketing blunders ever. Coke made some miscalculations, sure, but the biggest one, not accounting for the psychological effect that taking away Coke Classic would have on Coke's biggest and most vocal fans. A former Coca-Cola executive summed it up when he said, "We did not know what we were selling. We are not selling a soft drink. We were selling a little tiny piece of people's lives."